There was some directional conflict between the board management team, and that was really what triggered the next change.
Yeah.
The next change was about, okay, well, some of us want to take the business over here to the right or to the north, and the other person wanted to take the brand to the west, and so we sort of, we all kind of got to a point where we agreed it wasn't going to build or grow or move forward unless there was something that changed.
Yeah.
Welcome to The Little Black Book, a podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs who provide their first-hand experiences to help others learn and grow. This podcast is brought to you by Altitude Advisory. Altitude Advisory is a modern business advisory firm helping business owners build a better business for a better life.
In this episode of The Little Black Book, I'm joined by Anna Fisher. Anna is the co-owner, director and grape counter of Zonte's Footsteps Wines. Zonte's Footstep, a proud independent Australian wine company based in McLaren Vale. Anna and the business focus on learning, having fun, ensuring dependability and authenticity, and living as a free spirit, not confined by all the conventions of rules. After a career in professional services and business management, Anna took the plunge into business ownership, where she uses her skills as a skilled change agent, specialising in operational improvements, risk management, systems integration, and culture re-engineering. In this episode, Anna shares her journey from business management into business ownership and the challenges along the way, including the departure of shareholders from the business. She shares her learnings about this process and the need for an appropriately drafted shareholders agreement. She talks about the evolution of the business brand and how it has been critical to stay true to core values as the business has grown and scaled. Anna specifically talks about the need to understand not only the profitability of the business, but more importantly, the cash flow needs of a growing enterprise.
Hi, I'm Anna, co-owner, director and grape counter at Zonte's Footstep Wines, and I hope you enjoy my interview with The Little Black Book.
Hi Anna, favourite movie of all time?
I saw this question and I went, I don't actually know. I'm going to say Ever After, which is a Cinderella story with Drew Barrymore in it. But I'm not. I would only say that because when I was probably younger, that was my favourite movie.
Yeah,
I've got a bit of an eclectic taste when it comes to different movies. I quite like my thrillers. About the only thing I don't like are horror.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So the whole Cinderella theme has that carried through with you with all the Disney classics and things like that as you've grown older, or is that been left in your past?
Well, I have two daughters who both quite like singing, and so the current favourite in the household is Encanto.
Right.
To the point that I think I've officially know the words off by heart. We don't talk about Bruno,
right?
Which gets played pretty much every morning on the way to school. So,
okay. Love it.
Yeah, Disney still shows.
What about a book that you read as a child or as a young adult that has had a real impact on you professionally or personally?
I'm going to go personal and Bridge to Terabithia. Now, this is an interesting story. This is probably the book that got me into reading.
Yeah.
So I love reading. I churn through books at a rate of knots, whether they're, proper, novels or whether they're just a light-hearted, novella of some sort of description. But I just love reading. And that was really something I didn't like reading at school. And when I was living in Denver, Colorado, I can still remember my teacher, what she looked like, her Miss Thompson it was, and she had a passion for reading, and it was the book that we were reading that year at the elementary school.
Yeah.
And that's really the book that got me into reading.
Into it. So is it mainly fiction type stuff that you read, or are you into business books and things like that as well, or?
Mix, big on podcasts.
Yep.
I really enjoy listening. I'm probably more of an audio learner, so I tend to read fiction and read non-fiction and listen to fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. You just mentioned Denver, Colorado. So this is something that I don't know about you. Tell me about that. Is that, grew up there or just spent some time there?
No, my dad actually was a guidance officer, which is a psychologist for the education department in South Australia. And in 89, you can start to guess how old I am. In 1989, we did a family exchange. So he went over and worked within the schooling system over there as a psychologist, and we exchanged houses and lives with another family who came and lived over here. So
wow.
12 months we were over there as kids. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. So which kind of leads then into the next question. I can imagine that must have been a massive experience for you at that age. But is either that or is there another travel experience that was really impactful on you?
Look, I will actually talk about my gap year, as I call it. Between high school and uni, I took a year off. I got into civil and environmental engineering at uni. I wasn't convinced that was the right fit for me, but thought I'd give it I got in.
There we go.
And headed off overseas. I'd actually started as a choral tour, so I used to sing in the Adelaide Girls Choir, and we had a trip over there with the choir, and I basically left over there, and they all headed home, and that was the end of my choral life. But stayed and was based out of London. I worked at Harrods, did a summer camp in Maine, and I came back and ended up changing my degree and changing my life. So
yeah. So you went from engineering, you then went into finance, didn't you?
No. I went into ecotourism.
Right.
So I got into a new degree that was running at Flinders University, and it was effective. The best way to explain it is it was a science and business degree combined.
Yeah.
So it was getting people ready to run small businesses in the ecotourism space.
Right, okay. So how did you end up then, engineering to ecotourism? You've ended up in finance.
True, yes.
And then you've ended up in, I would call it the wine industry as a manager and owner. Talk us through that whole career transition for you. It sounds quite an interesting journey.
I'm good at saying yes. How's that for an answer? Okay, so I finished my degree, had all intentions of heading back overseas and leaving the state. And in the last 3 months, I met my now husband and father of both my children, and thought, I quite like this guy. He's in the Metro Fire Service here and was not planning on leaving Adelaide. And so I started to look at what options there were for me in the ecotourism space in Adelaide. And let's just suggest that in the late 90s, there weren't a lot of options.
It wasn't a lot.
In fact, I don't even know that most people knew what ecotourism was back then. And so the options really were for me to get into the South Australian Tourism Commission in some kind of administrative role. And so I, to sort of prepare for that, I got myself an office manager role in a accounting firm. And that office manager role kind of went from being running sort of reception and all the back office stuff to, over a period of time, I was consulting and basically took what was my the business component, extended that to complete a Masters of Business, and then went on to complete my CPA. At the end of all of that, I realised that I didn't like tax. So working in public practice was probably not a good fit for me.
Yeah.
So I left that organisation and got a job in the IT industry as a finance and admin manager for a small software company.
Yeah.
I was there for about 3 years, sort of finished in kind of more of a general manager role. And at that point, I sort of was looking at working. I was in the city, I was commuting to the city and living down in McLaren Vale. Started to look for something a bit closer to home, and the job came up at the winery.
Yeah.
So I went from IT into the wine industry.
Yep.
Still a bit of even at the time then, it was still a bit of a hopefully I'm a good fit here. It was a massive shift from, I guess, working in business services into a manufacturing environment. At the time, McLaren Vintners was probably the 4th largest winery in McLaren Vale. At one point there, it was about the 2nd largest, and they've reopened Rosemount now, so I think we might be back down to sort of 3rd or 4th again.
Yeah.
And, we grew that business from 3,000 tonnes to 6,000 tonnes over the life of my journey with them. Also got involved because of links in the organisational structures with general managing Galvanised Wine Group, which is Penny's Hill, Black Chook, Mr Riggs. That's all changed, and then in 2009, because of all those interrelationships, had the opportunity to get involved in Zonte's Footstep.
Yeah.
So became an owner.
There you go. So, I mean, it's interesting, that whole dynamic, going from the professional services area, even managing an accounting business, managing an IT business, in that, and then moving into, like you said, into manufacturing in a really specialised area.
Yes.
Talk through your learning and your challenges as you've transitioned through those different roles.
Oh, look, I think my biggest strength is systems. So I can see and operate well within a system structure. So, whether you believe it or not, there is some management thought that, a significant percentage of, business success is based on the systems and, making sure that you develop good systems so that your people can succeed.
Yeah.
And so really, in a lot of ways, although they were quite different environments, there was a lot of similarities around what my role was, which was really, implementing good systems, building great cultures, getting the best out of the people. And so even though on an operational level, quite distinct, at a strategic business level, there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah. Look, I think that's a really good point. And, you just mentioned a couple of really, I guess, important fundamentals in business, about your systems and processes, and then also the culture of the workforce or the organisation that you're in. Now, as you're going through and, I guess, establishing them, how is it that you've managed to take people on that journey with you, if you like?
Look, I would actually say that I think I'm a very open manager. So in terms of my communication style, in terms of bringing the people or the team or whatever terminology you want to use, we go on the journey together. And that starts at building core values of the business together. Mm-hmm. It involves being transparent and open to the best of my ability with information. Mm-hmm. There's obviously as an owner, there are some things that you can't share at certain times, but as much as I can, I will always try to share information and make sure that people are across what's going on.
Yeah.
And probably that's something that sat with everything I've done in terms of bringing people on those journeys with us.
Yeah.
So,
and look, I mean, the reality is, you mentioned how McLaren Vale Vintners, grew from 3,000 tonne to 6,000 tonne. You can't grow an organisation without those systems and processes and the culture there to do it.
Correct, absolutely.
Ultimately, something breaks and blows up if you don't have those things in place.
Yep.
Let's just talk now. 2009, you said you introduced to Zonte's. What made you take the plunge ultimately into ownership? Because it's a very different journey and mindset from being, I'll call it a corporate manager or general manager of an organisation, CEO, whatever you like, to then having to put on more of an entrepreneurial hat and become an owner of a business. Yeah. What was it that attracted you actually to business ownership, that when the opportunity presented said, okay, well, this is something that I want to do?
Oh, I did see this question. I thought this is actually quite an interesting one. My first foray into owning a business actually happened when I was working in public practice.
Okay.
So I would have been in my early 20s at the time. It wasn't a lot of money, but I did actually remortgage my house to put some money into a small business that we were starting on the side for a project that was happening. Mm-hmm. I became a director. I became a small shareholder of that. And, at the time, that didn't work or proceed, and we walked away from that venture. But I think it's something that's it's maybe something you either have or you don't. I love the opportunity to have some influence over my own destiny. I love having the opportunity to really make choices that I can have influence over.
Yeah.
So during my various employment and roles, I've reported to boards, I've reported to owners, and often felt that whole kind of, 2 step forward, 1 step back thing where, you're getting momentum and then, something changes or the board takes a different direction or the owner takes a different direction. And, you have to respect that. That's their business. That's their choice to do that. But I think for me personally, I've just always loved the idea of, 6 steps forward, no steps back, that makes sense. And so, when the opportunity came to be an owner in my early 20s, I was prepared to do that. Yeah. When the opportunity came up to get involved in Zonte's, having, I guess, run the winery that made the product for 2 years. Yeah. And at a point where it was a good opportunity, the business had a fairly big setback in the GFC, and having had most of its volume being sold through the US and the UK with exchange rates, it gave us an opportunity to, get involved at a reasonable value.
Yeah.
And at that stage, I was just an investor.
Yeah.
I wasn't involved in, other than running the winery, I was an investor, not a, not the business manager.
Yeah.
And that and then that slowly grew. So, 2011, I took over as the general manager of the larger group, and that encompassed, having more day-to-day operational involvement with Zonte's.
Yeah.
2013, we restructured the entire organisation, and that gave, and I set up another business that was sort of involved in managing wine businesses at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So working, sort of almost going back to that kind of, service model structure that you sometimes see in medical practices and things like that.
Professional services.
And that gave me an opportunity to kind of run individually, 5 or 6 different companies.
Mm-hmm.
And again, get more involved in the day-to-day of what was Zonte's. And then really 2016 was the point where, we'd had, again, some changes in ownership. We'd had massive growth across the board. And so the businesses that we'd started running as 6 sort of individual businesses all became self-sufficient in their own right, which was great. And so then we just went, all right, it's time to actually work full-time in my own business.
Yeah.
And by that stage, I'd started as a minor shareholder. I'm now I'm still technically a minor shareholder, but the largest shareholder of Zonte's.
Yeah.
And, it made sense for me to do that.
So tell us a bit more about that journey from going from an investor to then an owner manager, if you like, through that transition. When you first bought in, there's other partners that are shareholders. How did you go through the criteria checklist or figuring out who are the people that you wanted to do this with? Because it's always an interesting dynamic being in business with other people.
It is, yes.
And so how did you pick those people, or did they pick you, or how did that work?
Let's go with initially they picked me. Initially it was the original sort of 6 that were involved in that process of ownership transition. Some were part of the original structure, some were part of the management structure. The transition that happened there was really to do with who was involved day to day or had touch points within the business. Mm-hmm. So we had winemaker, marketing person, salesperson, winery person in terms of operational, and then sort of investors that had been involved in the previous structure. So it was sort of the way that it kind of all fell out. I certainly wouldn't say that I chose my business partners. I'd say if anything, it was chosen as part of the process. Yeah. We did then have to buy 2 of them out. Yeah. Which actually resulted in buying 3 of them out because there was a link in there. But, one of those was for personal reasons. They couldn't maintain their shareholding. Yeah. And others, one was because it wasn't the right fit in terms of organisational direction, very different philosophy in terms of business and how that should work. I guess where we've got to now is, the more I've got involved and the more I've invested in it, the more I've had an opportunity to have influence over who my business partners are. And, I'd certainly say that Brad and I, who are now the major shareholders together and the directors of the organisation, work incredibly well together. Yeah. It's, not always perfect, but, we're a good fit in the sense of, we both have our strengths. There's not, there's a little bit of crossover, but largely we kind of do the things that we're both really good at. And
it gels together. Yeah. It's interesting, this whole journey and I'm interested just your view on this, with the benefit of hindsight. A lot of people go into business or start business or buy business because they're really passionate about what they're doing or they've got a real clear vision about what something looks like. I'm curious as to whether you and the others saw that in Zonte's to start with, or whether it was just an opportunistic buy. You said, valuation and things like that at the time. And then obviously that cultural change where, it sounds as though through that journey, this business has changed massively from where you originally, got involved as a shareholder to now where you're one of the major shareholders and running it both operationally, culturally, all those sort of things. Do you want to talk about that if you can?
Let's just say it was a journey. Yeah. I don't know that there was a lot of conscious changes. I think a lot of it was, definitely opportunistic at the start. It was certainly not something where we sat down and went, okay, we're going to make, this is what we want this brand to be in, 15 years' time. It was a solid brand. It had a lot of brand recognition within the spaces that it had played. It had had a fairly significant knock, which gave us an opportunity, and there was more, there's certainly more to that story in terms of, there was lots of players, lots of different trigger points, but it worked for us. It worked out for us. Really the next sort of two phases of change were, partly around strategic direction of the, and let's call it a board, although it was, yes, there were directors and we met, but it was probably more of a management team. But, there was some directional conflict between the board management team, and that was really what triggered the next change. The next change was about, okay, well, some of us want to take the business over here to the right or to the north, and the other person wanted to take the brand to the west, and so we sort of, we all kind of got to a point where we agreed it wasn't going to build or grow or move forward unless there was something that changed. And so that sort of drove that buyout, if you want to call it that that process of actually, changing that ownership structure. The next one was really more of a personal situation. It was driven for the other business partner. It certainly wasn't something that we'd planned or perhaps foreseen. What I would say that came out of that, though, was that by having, I guess, two people, which is myself and Brad, who ended up, at the other end of that, and at the point where we were both looking for something to really dive into, it gave us that opportunity to actually, and this is, we're talking 2016 at this point, so it really gave us as a strategic management team to really start to look at where we wanted to go with the brand. And I think that's really where, and you could see that through 2016 through to 2020, but through from 16 to 2020 the business grew 15% year on year. We did a massive rebrand. We actually had 1 year where it jumped, even more significantly off the back of some China sales that we got. But as a whole, the business was, we'd rebranded, we'd repositioned, we'd, all the tick boxes that you as an accountant, I guess, want to achieve. We were managing our cost of goods sold better. We were, working on improving our pricing position. We were less focused on volume, more focused on value, like that value, volume, and building a business around that. So I think it was unfortunate, the situation that happened that caused us to, I guess, head out as a two. The advantage of that for us was that it gave us much better focus. Yeah, no, that's a great story. Just did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. So I think there's, in my experience, there's a lot of business owners that have gone through similar situations or are potentially going through similar situations as to what you went through with, partners leaving and buyouts and different strategic directions. I just want to ask, with the benefit of hindsight, was there anything that you would have done differently, or is there some things that you got right as a group, like whether it be, shareholders agreements or valuations or things like that made that process perhaps less painful to go through, or is there anything that, with the benefit of hindsight, that you would have done differently that would have made that better?
The stars must be aligned at the moment. I actually had this exact conversation with somebody yesterday.
Right.
The answer to that is, in hindsight, we would have done things quite differently. A massive one for us was we have now rewritten our shareholders agreement. So we had a shareholders agreement. So we didn't not have a document, if that makes sense. It wasn't that we didn't have something, but it wasn't as explicit as it needed to be in certain components. So one of the things that we have done post those buyouts is rewritten the shareholders agreement. We've been much more prescriptive in relation to how valuations happen when they're internal versus how they'll happen if they're external, versus that whole concept of push and pull, and so there's a lot of stuff. I mean, we were quite lucky that the constitution that we had from day dot was actually pretty good. It wasn't a bad, it was actually had a lot of good stuff in there. The shareholders agreement that we had, which it was signed by everybody, it was drafted to a point, but it was probably never done as professionally as it should have been, gave us some level of guidance, but it missed a lot of,
Had a lot of holes.
The process identified a lot of holes,
Yeah.
and we ended up getting a formal valuation done by an external party, to really kind of knuckle down that process.
Yeah.
But in both situations, we're talking it took us 12 to 18 months to
Wow.
go through that buyout process.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of distraction for
Yeah.
a small business.
Yeah.
It's a lot of rejigging finances, rejigging business structures that really in a lot of ways businesses like ours can't afford,
Yeah.
but you just do.
And I think one of the key, I think that's a great experience that you've shared there. I often talk about when people are talking about going into business or starting a business or starting in partnership, they have to prepare the foundations like it doesn't work tomorrow.
Yep.
So how do you get out? Not necessarily how do you get in. And everyone goes in to business, everything's rosy, nothing's ever going to go wrong. We're going to love each other forever. The reality is it doesn't happen like that all the time. And you need to cover those bases because you're 100% right. For a process to take 12 or 18 months in a small business and, having people sitting around the board table making decisions that don't love each other anymore is really hard.
Yep.
So, that's a great share.
Yeah.
You mentioned before with the growth at 15% year on year, the 2016 through 2020 and you just mentioned some of the stuff that, is really near and dear to my heart about knowing your numbers and your cost of sales and all those sort of things that are going on. With your background in finance, how much do you think, because I think a lot of business owners don't know their numbers very well. With your background in finance and understanding some of those key drivers and the numbers, the micro numbers behind the scenes as to what actually makes this work, how important has that been for you guys to control and manage that growth and that and the business?
One of the big things I think that can happen in a small business is you can get too caught up in the finance stuff. Because at the end of the day, it's often the passion and the sales and the driving force that will actually create the success for the company. But one of my favourite sayings, which I think most accountants like to chuck out there, is profit is vanity and cash is king.
Yeah.
And if you don't really genuinely understand what's going on in your business around that balancing act of, profitability or cash flow, you can think you're doing very well and still not succeed.
Yeah.
The wine industry, for all of its failings, is a great industry to be involved in. It's lots of fun.
Yeah.
But I certainly wouldn't look at it at this point in time and say it's something that I'd be putting all my eggs into that basket.
Yeah.
I think we've got a lot of pain for the next few years, and that ability to understand your numbers and to understand what's going on within your business is going to be critical for the success of any of the businesses.
Yeah.
That and I don't think it's just wine. I think wine's had a couple of massive hits recently with the tariffs for China.
Yeah.
The flow-on impact of that within our industry. Because it's not just about the tariffs in China, it's about the 110 million litres of wine that's no longer going to China.
Yeah.
And where is that going?
Yeah.
On top of that, we've had COVID and that the flow-on impact of that from an international logistics perspective, when you've got the cost of, containers going from being $2,000 or $3,000 for a 20-foot container to, $15,000, and when you're talking about 1,200 cases of wine being on a container, that's a significant additional cost per case, So there's a lot of, so unfortunately, like right at this minute, being on top of your numbers is probably, I spend a lot more time doing that at the moment than what I usually do, because I want to make sure that we make decisions as early as we possibly can to make sure that we're still going to be here in 3 years' time.
Yeah. And I guess particularly around that cash flow side of things.
Yeah.
Because, the wine industry is a little bit unique in terms of the level of stock and the length of time stock is carried relative to, other, manufacturing or retail type enterprises, and, to, go and, pick some grapes and then, sell them 24 months later.
Or 3 years, as the case is often.
Yeah. You're carrying that cash flow for that long, which looks good from a profitability perspective, but the money's not back in your bank for 3 years. which can be crippling.
Yeah, and particularly off the back of growth.
Yeah.
I mean, our industry, 15% is a massive push for anyone in our industry as far as growth goes.
Yeah.
Because if you kind of factor in that, over a 3-year period, that's then almost doubling of your revenue.
Yeah.
That almost means you're doubling your intake of tonnage over that same period of time. And, working capital is not a happy number in the wine industry.
Yeah.
But,
and normally with those sort of numbers in your profitability is going up but your cash flow is actually going 100% in reverse.
Yep.
So, that's, I think your points there are really important.
Yep.
You mentioned about I call it the brand and this growth and, your own stamp that you and Brad have been able to put on this. What's been some of the, key triggers or key elements that has worked for you guys since you took over with the branding and the growth and things like that?
If I want to sort of pick probably 3 or 4 words that work for us, one of them is authenticity. Brad likes the word integrity better. It doesn't really matter. We use it interchangeably, all right?
We're talking to you, not Brad.
Yeah, that's correct. So let's go with authenticity. A massive thing for us is that we're real. It's a challenging thing when you've got 2,600 wine producers in Australia. You've got 6 of those that make up a significant percentage of the total volume. You've got brands that are being developed by some of the larger companies and larger organisations that are they are literally a brand that just sits on a shelf and has no sort of backstory or history to it.
Yeah.
So being authentic to who we are is really critical part of what we do. There's a lot of other people who play in that space, so I'm not sure that that's what you'd call your one thing that makes us unique. And within that is making sure that we produce, quality, authentic wines. I think the 2 that really work for us though is fun. We as a, whatever word you want to use for that, whether it's enjoyment, whether it's fun, whether it's thing is adventure, all of those are interchangeable within our organisation in the context of we don't see wine as pompous or, for us, wine is part of food.
Yeah.
We want people to see how wine, it improves the experience of, sitting with friends and, and I think that's something that as an industry, there's a real balancing act in there around, we're talking about, we want people to just have a glass of wine with dinner at night and enjoy it and, have that, it's about the time and the elements that creates and whether that's, heading down into the wine in the can space and, which is one of our big projects at the moment, which is all about, making something daily approachable.
Different, yeah.
So that's what that's about. We don't want to be pompous. We want to be sort of fun. Relatable. And the last one is really about learning and education.
Yeah.
A massive thing for us is that whenever we look at anything that we do, we're trying to look at how we can help people learn about whether it's the wine or whether it's the way that you drink wine or whether it's the components of what happens within our industry. That's one of our passions is learning and education, and that then flows into all 3 of those actually flow into our business as well. So that's kind of if you take authenticity, fun and learning and just work with those. Those 3 things are about our customers, but they're also about our team, and they're about our organisation.
Yeah, it's great. I love you just sort of touched on one of these other little rabbit holes we'll just go down. Wine in a can. Now, there is a lot of, I'll call them wine snobs that'll listen to this. They're going, you can't put good wine in a can. Now, I've actually,
You've had some, have you not?
I've had some.
Yeah, okay, good.
I've had some. And it's, you are, I guess, challenging the status quo here with this a little bit. We've gone away and there's been I call it a shift in the market in Australia over recent years. We've gone from corks to screw tops. We're now talking about putting good quality wine, not $2 chuck in a can where people can actually legitimately enjoy a glass of wine at dinner without having to open a 750 ml bottle.
Yep.
Talk us through that process and some of the, I guess, that journey of where you've got to, and I guess the challenges that you think you'll face or have faced in establishing credibility with that.
We first sort of dabbled in wine in a can about 6 years ago now.
Yeah.
We put Prosecco in a 330ml can. Seemed like a fantastic idea. I'll get back to the fact that it is a fantastic idea, but at the time there was a few challenges with that. We went with a 330ml can, which was actually 3.2 standard drinks in a can.
Yep.
Don't hold me to that. It might have been 3 point something else, but let's go with that.
Yeah.
The product was awesome. The volumetric we had to do back then was quite significant, and we had conversations with some larger buyers who were keen on it, but we sort of missed a few critical points in the process, and they weren't able to take the product that we produced because we had the word happy on it. Not allowed to call alcohol happy, so it was a bit of an oversight on our part. But Bolle Felice, which is the name of the product, means happy bubbles. So it was kind of our interpretation of that wording.
Yeah.
So
legal compliance, you've got to love it.
Wonderful, fun stuff. So eventually we sold through all of that over a period of time through more sort of bits and pieces. But what it did show us is that there's definitely an opportunity there. We're now looking at, smaller volumes. So the canning that we've done, that you've tried, is 250ml cans. But there's a lot of technical elements to it that we're still working through. And the reality is that 95% of wine, don't hold me to that percentage, but it's a very big percentage of wine within wineries is held in stainless steel vessels.
Yeah.
It's not held in the romantic, barrel.
Yeah.
In fact, wine going into a can, you almost don't want it to be. You want it to be quite sort of fresh and young.
Yeah.
One of the things we're finding is that the older wine is causing heavy metals to become accentuated as a flavour profile. They've got cans now with amazing lining, which prevents the acidity of the wine, getting into the canning line. So the technology now is such that there is no reason why we can't put fantastic wine into a can.
Yeah.
There is a reality that we're not asking people to lay a can down for 10 years. I think if you're the person who likes to get an incredible bottle of wine and lay it down for 10 years, I will still be buying, $50 bottles of wine and laying them down for 10 years. We're not talking about putting that sort of product
different market
into it.
Yeah.
We're talking about, having something that is good quality, that is, so probably your sort of $25 to $30 bottles of wine into wine in a can.
Yeah.
And it's single serve volumes. It's so much better for the outdoors. Environmentally, it's better. It's better recyclability. There's a lot of positives in it it's lighter vessels, so it's better for logistics. It's better for transport. There's so many layers of it.
Yeah.
The things we love about it are responsible service of alcohol as well.
Yep.
It's doing single serve drinks rather than having to open a whole bottle because you want to have a drink, you can just open a can.
Yeah.
But my big passion for driving it was actually because I do a lot of four-wheel driving. Going back to my ecotourism days.
Yeah.
We get out, my husband and I have got a 3.5 week trip planned coming up where we're doing the west coast of Australia.
Yeah.
Because we can actually get to WA now.
Yeah.
And, one of my frustrations as a lover of wine is carrying bottles on four-wheel driving trips is painful, can be dangerous because you get glass breakages. And so for me, it gives me an option that's not, so a cider or a beer. And look, I like beer and I like cider, but I don't want to drink them every day. I don't drink wine every day.
Yeah.
But it gives us those alternatives. And so if we've got a fizzy white and a Prosecco and a white wine and a rosé and a red, I'm sorted.
Perfect.
Yep.
And and I think you're right. You can take it to you can sit by the pool.
Yep.
You can take it to the beach. You can go camping with it. I think there is a really neat segment of the market there that we're targeting, and I touch wood that the wine snobs don't discount it because it is in a can, because it's good, it works. You mentioned just going camping there, and you mentioned earlier husband, couple of daughters. How have you managed with all this business growth and everything else that's going on to juggle parenthood, business ownership, business management? What's been some of your tips and tricks to enabled that to work?
There's that, being a business owner gives you a lot of flexibility. One of the things for me in it gives you choice.
Yeah.
Choice is probably the better word for it. Gives you choice. I am wealthy enough to live my life the way I want to live it.
Yep.
I'm not actually driven by money. That's, it's nice, but it's not the focus of my life.
Yeah.
And so I would rather employ an amazing operational person within my organisation to do things.
Yeah.
And put that money towards that person so that I can have my weekends.
Yeah, okay.
So that's a business choice that we make.
Yep.
That's something that very consciously we've made choices around our business to make it a lifestyle opportunity for us. It helps that, my husband is the ultimate lifestyle man, so he's also probably grounded me a lot in that. But I don't work weekends as much as possible. I might occasionally check, there might be something that comes up that I have to look into, but I don't work weekends. I rarely, I rarely work nights. I might sort of do that a couple of times a month in terms of, catch up or whatever it might be that something comes up. But, I coach my daughter's netball team. I have been up until recently an age group manager at the surf club. I'm now doing a mentorship role there, which is sort of working with all the age group managers to get them all sort of up to speed. Try and do yoga 2 or 3 times a week. It's choice.
Yeah.
And, there is a balancing act in there. I don't think I could ever have been a Christine Holgate if I use that. And Christine, I know, she's an incredible, amazing, powerful woman. But she's made a lot of choices to achieve what she's achieved.
Yeah.
And I've got no idea actually what her balanced lifestyle looks like, but I imagine she puts a lot more into that workspace. Whereas for me, it's not about that.
Yeah.
It's, I don't want to be on that, multi-million-dollar CEO salary, I guess. I'm more interested in getting being happy in what I've got and where I am and having the life.
Yeah.
Because in my personal opinion, I'm only here once, and I don't want to spend that entire. I don't want to be that person on my deathbed that says, "I wish I'd done more."
I'd done that. Yeah. Do you have a life motto?
I don't think so. Live. I don't know that I've ever really put one down in writing anywhere. I just think it's whatever choices I make, it's usually made because I think there's an opportunity to learn. There's an opportunity to, and again, what's interesting is when you actually take these 3 words, they come back to the business as well, which is why I think the brand works. It's about having fun. It's about learning, and it's about doing it authentically.
Yeah.
And I guess in some ways that's why you see those 3 things come through everything.
Cool. Thanks, Anna. It's been a lot of fun.
You're welcome.